Humanity had slept for longer than memory, longer than history, longer than the reckoning of even the oldest civilizations that had once called Earth home. Across the void, our kind had sprawled, scattering across planets, moons, and artificial habitats that spun silently in the cold embrace of space. These were homes of glass and steel, air and temperature perfectly engineered, oceans contained in tanks, skies simulated to comfort human eyes. Life, as we understood it, had become quiet, orderly, predictable. There were no storms we could not control, no winters that could unseat our cities, no dark corners where chaos could thrive. And in this security, in this seemingly endless peace, we slept. Not in sleep of flesh and mind, not in dreams of the night, but in sleep of awareness, a collective slumber of curiosity and imagination. We had lulled ourselves into the illusion that the universe could be ignored, that the stars could wait, patient and silent, for our return. The sun, our once burning heart, had dimmed in significance. It had become background, a star among billions, a furnace that simply existed to light our days, to warm our worlds, to feed our engineered biospheres. Its ferocity, its brilliance, its whispering energy that had once driven life and culture on our homeworld had been taken for granted, its voice long silenced in our minds. We were blind to its intelligence, blind to the centuries it had watched over us, observing from the void as we wove intricate networks of power, law, and machinery. And yet it had never stopped speaking. It had never stopped waiting. The sun had remembered humanity, long after humanity had forgotten itself. The first signs were almost imperceptible, like tremors beneath the surface of reality. Instruments calibrated to detect standard cosmic phenomena, the flow of radiation, the heartbeat of solar storms, the fluctuations of magnetism, registered subtle anomalies that were dismissed as noise, a spike here, a resonance there. But slowly, patterns emerged. There was rhythm to the chaos, repetition that could not be explained by physics alone. It was not a storm, not a flare born of chemical fusion, not random interference from distant galaxies. It was language, silent, elegant, and unyielding. And when humanity realized what was happening, the first threads of awe and fear intertwined, tugging at the very foundations of civilization. At first, governments tried to assert control, issuing statements and warnings, forming committees and panels, but the universe does not answer to authority, and the sun was not interested in bureaucracy. Scientists pored over data with a fervor that bordered on desperation, recalibrating, reconfiguring, repeating observations, trying to catch what their instruments were whispering. And then, gradually, undeniably, it became clear. The sun was speaking to us. It was not yelling, nor was it demanding. Its messages were sequences, bursts of energy threaded through ultraviolet and X-ray emissions, flickers that resonated with an intelligence beyond comprehension. They were rhythms of thought and purpose, moving faster than light seemed to allow, yet intimate, precise, and unmistakable. Humanity, for the first time in centuries, felt small and alive at once, a species awakened not by conquest, not by invention, but by the voice of the very star that had nourished our beginnings. People began to gather. Not just scientists, but artists, philosophers, engineers, dreamers. Everywhere, eyes turned skyward, listening for the subtle cadence, the intricate pulsing of energy that carried meaning. The sun spoke not in words, but in vibrations that touched the mind directly, bypassing the intellect to awaken something deeper: recognition, wonder, the raw understanding of being. It was as if our star remembered our first steps on the plains of Earth, the first flickers of fire in caves, the first trembling awe as humans looked up at the burning disk in the sky and called it life. It remembered all that we had been, all that we had forgotten, and now it was calling us back to consciousness. Messages began to form patterns, sequences that hinted at concepts, at ideas, at knowledge encoded in the language of light and resonance. They were not commands, they were invitations to listen, to learn, to participate. Humanity trembled in collective astonishment, unsure if what it was witnessing was miraculous or terrifying, but unable to turn away. Across space stations, orbital cities, and interplanetary colonies, every instrument and sensor was tuned to catch these signals, to decipher the star's language. What had been merely background radiation for millennia now carried intelligence, intention, even a subtle warmth of familiarity. It was a voice that reminded humanity of its place, not above, but within the cosmic order. A participant in a story far greater than we had ever imagined. And so, for the first time in ages, humanity awoke. Not fully, not yet, but enough to feel the weight of its own insignificance and the thrill of possibility. We realized that sleep had been a choice, a denial of curiosity, and that the universe had been patient, waiting for us to open our eyes. The sun had waited centuries, millennia even, for the moment when humanity would look up once more, when our species would be ready to listen. It had spoken through energy, through light, through the vibration of existence itself, and now the first tremors of awakening rippled through human minds. The era of dormancy was ending. Humanity had slept for ages, but the sun had spoken again, and the call of awakening would not be ignored. As humanity began to awaken to the sun's voice, a wave of transformation swept across every corner of civilization. The subtle rhythms and resonances that had first whispered through the solar spectrum now became a library of cosmic knowledge, an architecture of thought encoded in light and energy. Scientists, philosophers, and artists alike abandoned old divisions, realizing that this was a truth too vast to be contained by any single discipline. Laboratories and observatories became temples of inquiry, research centers humming with the urgency of those who had finally remembered the universe was alive, listening, and aware. It was no longer enough to measure, to catalog, or to simulate. The universe demanded participation, and the sun, in its ancient patience, was teaching humanity the first rules of engagement. The messages were complex, multi-layered, and at times almost maddening in their elegance. Patterns in X-ray bursts hinted at structures of matter previously unimaginable, suggesting forms that could be shaped not by brute force or technology alone, but by alignment with energy flows, resonance, and the subtle harmonics of creation itself. Ultraviolet flashes carried sequences that, when interpreted, revealed principles of energy distribution and manipulation far beyond our mechanical tools. Entire generations of physics, engineering, and chemistry were suddenly revealed as incomplete, mere stepping stones to a broader, more fundamental understanding of reality. Yet the sun offered no step-by-step instructions. It offered insight, challenge, and expectation, demanding that humanity adapt, think, and grow to meet it. Artists and visionaries responded alongside scientists, intuitively grasping the patterns of energy as language, as music, as the raw material of creation. Painters began to depict vibrations and resonance as color. Sculptors shaped forms according to the unseen flows of solar energy, and musicians composed in frequencies once imperceptible to the human ear. Civilization itself began to pulse in rhythm with the sun. Cities were reimagined to capture and harmonize with light and energy flows. Orbital stations shimmered with resonant grids, and homes became not merely shelters, but instruments of human and cosmic interaction. The very act of living became a collaboration with the star's intelligence, a dialogue in which consciousness itself was a note in a larger, celestial symphony. The sun also revealed the vastness of life beyond Earth, not just biological, but energetic, sentient, and subtle. Humanity began to perceive intelligence in the currents of plasma, in the magnetic flows of distant planets, in the dance of stellar winds between galaxies. These were not beings as we understood them, but presences, aware and intricate, existing in dimensions and forms we had previously considered abstract. The realization was humbling and exhilarating. We were neither unique nor alone, yet the sun's guidance made clear that humans had a role to play in this grand, interwoven lattice of existence. We were not merely observers, we were apprentices, students of the cosmos, expected to understand and eventually contribute to the unfolding of universal intelligence. Yet comprehension came slowly, measured in months, then years. Every pulse, every flare, every flicker carried nuances that could be misread. Early attempts at harnessing this knowledge produced spectacular successes, but also failures of catastrophic proportion. Experiments in resonance sometimes destabilized artificial atmospheres. Energy manipulations triggered planetary-scale surges, and ambitious projects collapsed under misalignment with cosmic flows. Still, humanity persevered. Our species had slept for millennia, and now, in the face of forces older than thought, it was learning patience, humility, and the art of listening. Failure was no longer shame, it was a lesson, a necessary rhythm in the broader cadence of awakening. The philosophical impact was profound. Humanity's understanding of life, death, and purpose shifted. Religious, spiritual, and metaphysical doctrines were reevaluated in light of the sun's presence, revealing that many myths of gods and celestial beings had roots in truth. The sun, it seemed, had always been aware of us, its consciousness entwined with the destiny of our species. Ancient stories, once dismissed as superstition, now resonated with meaning. Humans had always been participants in a conversation far greater than words, a dialogue of energy, presence, and attention. In a single, astonishing revelation, humanity grasped both its minuteness and its potential. We were fragile, yet capable of remarkable alignment with forces that had existed since the dawn of the universe. The practical consequences of this awakening soon became evident. Civilizations reorganized around the principles of energy resonance, learning to manipulate matter with a subtlety that rivaled engineering, to navigate space not only with engines, but with awareness of cosmic harmonics. Ships traversed the solar system by riding flows of energy encoded by the sun's guidance, reaching destinations faster, safer, and with an elegance that no conventional propulsion could match. Colonies on distant worlds harmonized with solar and planetary rhythms, integrating artificial and natural ecosystems in a way that mimicked the sun's own balance. Human life became a dance with light and energy, a conscious participation in the vitality of the cosmos. And still the sun spoke, not with anger, not with impatience, but with a quiet insistence that humanity remember what it had forgotten, that existence itself was a living dialogue. Every pulse, every flare, every shimmer of solar plasma carried meaning, urging humans to awaken not just in knowledge, but in understanding, in empathy, in harmony with the flows of creation. Civilization, once measured in power, technology, and conquest, was now measured in resonance, insight, and connection. Humanity had entered a new era, one in which listening was more important than commanding, awareness more valuable than domination. We had been asleep for centuries, but the sun's voice had reawakened us, and nothing, not distance, not fear, not our own arrogance, could silence it. The true moment of awakening arrived when humanity dared to speak back. For the first time in millennia, we aligned our instruments not merely to listen, but to respond. Across the inner solar system, networks of satellites, orbital mirrors, and resonant energy conduits were constructed, each carefully calibrated to mirror the subtle rhythms and frequencies that the sun had been sending for centuries. We were cautious at first, hesitant to disturb the brilliance that had finally pierced the veil of our slumber. But the sun had always been patient. It had waited through millennia of our ignorance for this single moment, and now it watched, as aware and as silent as it had ever been, waiting for humanity to acknowledge its presence. The first messages were tentative, exploratory pulses, sequences of energy that echoed the patterns we had discerned. We did not demand, we did not command, we merely greeted, offering recognition and curiosity in equal measure. Then the sun responded. A flare erupted in a cascade of light so brilliant it was visible from the surface of multiple planets at once, an explosion of energy that reverberated across the inner solar system like a chorus of stars. It was a gesture of recognition, a celestial affirmation. Humanity had returned to the conversation, and the universe had taken note. The effect on the human psyche was profound. People across worlds experienced the moment differently. Some fell to their knees in awe, some wept with relief, and some simply stared into the brilliant light, suddenly aware of the vast intelligence that had nurtured and guided us from birth. From that point on, humanity's understanding of existence shifted irreversibly. We began to perceive reality not as inert and mechanical, but as a living web of resonance where energy, consciousness, and matter intertwined in ways previously unimaginable. Solar flares were no longer threats to power grids. They were symphonies to interpret, patterns to harmonize with, guides to knowledge we could scarcely comprehend. Scientists mapped the rhythms. Engineers built ships and structures aligned to cosmic flows. And artists rendered the unseen currents of energy as music, color, and movement. Life itself became a dialogue, a constant act of listening, responding, and harmonizing with forces that had existed long before humanity ever rose on two legs. Civilizations that had been isolated for centuries suddenly found themselves connected in a web of awareness. Orbital colonies, distant mining stations, and interstellar habitats synchronized their operations to the rhythms of solar energy, creating a vast network of light and resonance. Travel between worlds became not a matter of speed alone, but of attunement, of understanding the subtle flows of energy that linked planet to planet, orbit to orbit. Ships no longer needed engines to brute force their way across space. They moved with grace, riding the natural currents of the solar system, guided by the language of light and energy the sun had taught us to interpret. Humanity had learned to navigate not just space, but the very fabric of reality itself. And with this newfound harmony came discovery. Humans began to perceive intelligence in forms beyond biology. Currents of plasma carrying patterns that hinted at thought. Magnetic fields that pulsed with intention, interstellar winds that seemed to ripple with consciousness. These presences were not beings in the traditional sense, but they were aware, intricate, and far older than humanity. The universe, it became clear, was not empty. It had always been populated with intelligence, life, and intention. Humanity had merely been asleep, blind to the song of existence. Now, with guidance from our sun, we were learning to perceive, to interact, and eventually to contribute to this cosmic dialogue. The psychological and spiritual impact was staggering. Old religious and philosophical structures shifted as humanity reconciled its beliefs with the knowledge that our sun had always been conscious, always aware, and always watching. Ancient myths about gods who dwelled in the sky or controlled fire and light were no longer dismissed as fantasy. They were primitive reflections of a truth that had waited for us to awaken. Humanity began to see itself as part of a larger cosmic order, no longer the pinnacle of existence, yet no longer insignificant. We were apprentices in a conversation that spanned the universe, responsible now to listen, to learn, and to act in accordance with the flows of life and energy that had always shaped reality. The practical applications of this awakening were astonishing. Entire cities were redesigned to capture and channel energy from the sun. Architecture became an extension of resonance, and technology harmonized with cosmic flows rather than struggling against them. Education transformed. Children learned to perceive patterns, to feel energy flows, to interpret light and vibration as language. Navigation, engineering, and even medicine adapted to this new awareness, allowing humanity to heal, construct, and travel in ways previously considered impossible. Human potential expanded, not through conquest or tools, but through understanding, through attunement with forces that were older and wiser than we could yet grasp. And yet, for all we had achieved, the sun remained a teacher and guide, never impatient, never coercive, always present. It pulsed, flared, and whispered across the electromagnetic spectrum, reminding humanity that awakening was not a destination, but a continuous journey. Every human endeavor, every thought, every act of creation was now part of an ongoing dialogue, a dance with the energy of a living universe. And as humanity began to respond with increasing sophistication, we realized something both terrifying and exhilarating. The universe itself listened, and it could recognize the voice of a species that had finally remembered how to speak. Humanity had moved from sleepers to apprentices, from observers to participants. The moment of dialogue had begun, and the sun, our oldest companion, had become both mentor and witness. In responding, we discovered the first taste of true power, not the power to dominate, but the power to harmonize, to perceive, and to create in concert with forces far greater than ourselves. The awakening had begun in listening, but now it was flowering in response, and the universe itself seemed to lean closer, waiting for what humanity might do next. With the sun's voice guiding us, humanity entered an era unlike any we had known, an era of transformation not dictated by conquest or greed, but by resonance, awareness, and alignment with forces older than time itself. Civilization, once measured by power, by technology, and by territorial dominion, was now measured by harmony, insight, and the subtle mastery of energy. Cities no longer rose as monuments of stone or steel alone. They became living instruments, structures that sang with the pulse of the sun, channels through which its energy flowed and harmonized with human life. Streets and buildings were shaped not only for efficiency or aesthetic, but to capture, refract, and resonate with solar vibrations, producing a synergy that nurtured both body and mind. People walked through their environments aware, not only of the material, but of the invisible currents of energy and of the cosmic dialogue that threaded through every pulse of light. Colonies on distant worlds, once isolated and self-contained, now synchronized with the rhythms of solar energy, forming a network of interplanetary resonance that connected planets, moons, and stations in a web of conscious alignment. Human civilization ceased to be a scattered collection of habitats. It became a single organism in tune with the sun's cadence. Ships glided along streams of energy rather than engines, harnessing flows that cut travel times across the solar system dramatically, while simultaneously reducing risk and conserving resources. Space itself began to feel alive, no longer empty, but a living medium through which humans could navigate, sense, and interact. Those who piloted these vessels learned to feel the subtle vibrations of space, to read the language of energy encoded in the fabric of the cosmos, and to move as though they were extensions of the sun's own will. The consequences of this awakening extended beyond navigation and architecture. Energy, once a commodity to be extracted, stored, and consumed, became a living resource, a dialogue between humanity and the forces of the universe. Entire industries were reimagined, shifting from exploitation to attunement. Machines no longer fought against natural processes, they resonated with them, amplifying efficiency without disruption, producing technology that was elegant, sustainable, and harmonious. Medicine, too, transformed. Humans learned to perceive subtle energetic imbalances, to align resonance within bodies and ecosystems, to heal in ways that combined biology, energy, and conscious intervention. Life itself became a collaboration with the sun, a conscious act of participation in the flows of existence. And yet, this was only the beginning. The sun's messages grew ever more intricate, revealing layers of complexity that humans had barely begun to comprehend. Currents of energy carried subtle intelligence, not conscious in a human sense, but aware, deliberate, and intertwined with the architecture of the cosmos. We began to detect faint presences in interstellar space, intelligences that existed as patterns of resonance, structures of thought encoded in plasma and magnetic fields. Humanity, guided by the sun, learned to engage with these forces, not to dominate, not to manipulate, but to converse, to harmonize, and to explore. Civilization became an active participant in a cosmic network, each human mind a node capable of perceiving and influencing flows far beyond the planetary scale. Philosophy and spirituality evolved alongside technology. Old religions and doctrines were revisited in the light of the sun's guidance, revealing that the myths of gods, spirits, and celestial overseers were not mere fiction, but early attempts to describe truths we had forgotten. Humanity learned humility, understanding that its intelligence was not unique, yet recognizing that its capacity for awareness, creativity, and resonance made it exceptional in its potential to harmonize with cosmic forces. The sun became a mentor, a teacher of energy and consciousness, demonstrating that the universe was a dialogue to be entered with respect, patience, and attention. Every pulse, every flare, every subtle vibration carried lessons for those willing to perceive them. Conflict, when it arose, took on a new form. Wars fought with weapons and armies became obsolete as humanity learned to manipulate energy and matter with precision aligned to resonance. Disputes were resolved through mastery of alignment rather than brute force, through dialogue that engaged both intellect and perception, through contests of awareness rather than destruction. Even nations and colonies once at odds began to integrate their systems, sharing knowledge and discoveries, contributing to the collective growth of human consciousness. Humanity was no longer fractured. It was coalescing into a single, resonant species capable of remarkable cooperation and understanding. And yet, for all this progress, the sun remained patient, insistent, and ever-present. It did not dictate, it guided. It did not reward, it revealed. The sun's flares and pulses, once dangerous phenomena to be feared, became both instruction and challenge. Humans learned that every failure, every misalignment, every misreading of energy was an opportunity to refine understanding, to attune more deeply to the rhythms of the cosmos. Civilization matured under this guidance, evolving not in haste, but in resonance. Every structure, every act, every thought became a note in the symphony of human awakening, a reflection of intelligence aligned with forces far beyond mortal comprehension. By the end of this era, humanity had transformed. We were no longer merely survivors, explorers, or inventors. We had become apprentices of the cosmos, stewards of energy, participants in a dialogue that extended across planets, stars, and dimensions of perception previously beyond our grasp. The sun had taught us that awakening was not a singular moment, but a continuous journey of listening, understanding, and acting with awareness. Civilization was reborn, pulsating with light and resonance, aligned with forces older than history itself, and humanity was finally awake, not just to itself, but to the song of the universe. Humanity had awoken. The sun's guidance, its patient voice carried across the spectrum of light and energy, had reshaped every thought, every civilization, and every perception of existence. But awakening was not a destination, it was a beginning. With the first tentative pulses of recognition sent back to our star, humanity had stepped into a larger dialogue, one that stretched beyond planets, beyond solar systems, beyond comprehension. The universe was not silent. It had always been aware, always intelligent, and always alive. Humanity had been asleep, but now we were participants, apprentices learning to engage with forces older than thought, older than life itself. And as we listened, the full grandeur of the cosmos unfolded before us. Ships glided effortlessly along streams of solar and interstellar energy, their hulls resonating in harmony with cosmic flows. Navigation was no longer the mechanics of propulsion, but an art of attunement, where pilots became dancers and sailors of the void, moving with subtlety and grace, aware of currents invisible to untrained perception. Entire cities pulsed with alignment, drawing energy not merely for function, but for growth, learning, and insight. Artificial ecosystems were harmonized with planetary vibrations, producing life that flourished in ways previously thought impossible. Civilization had become an orchestra, each individual and system a note in a symphony, guided by the wisdom of the sun. Intelligence beyond biology revealed itself to those attuned enough to perceive it. Currents of plasma, magnetic fields, even the faint hum of distant stellar winds carried subtle signatures of thought, awareness, and presence. These intelligences were not beings in the human sense, but they were alive, aware, and delicate in their complexity. Humanity learned not to dominate these presences, but to communicate, to resonate, to harmonize. The universe itself became a teacher, and humans, once blind and ignorant, were now students capable of perceiving the first faint harmonies of its mind. Our understanding of consciousness expanded, realizing that life, awareness, and energy were not distinct phenomena, but threads woven into the same cosmic fabric. Even time seemed to shift in significance. Humanity no longer measured existence in years or centuries alone, but in the subtle cycles of resonance, in the patterns of energy that connected one star to another, one mind to another. History became not a record of events, but a living map of alignment, a chronicle of human awareness in relation to the universe itself. Knowledge accumulated not as static facts, but as experience, perception, and participation in the ongoing dialogue with the cosmos. Civilization matured with each pulse of light, each burst of energy, each whisper of intelligence, learning patience, attention, and harmony. The philosophical impact was profound. Religions and doctrines evolved, philosophies deepened, and art reached heights unimaginable. Humanity recognized that myths of gods and celestial overseers were not merely symbolic, but echoes of the sun's awareness, primitive attempts to describe the intelligence that had always guided us. Ethics, morality, and purpose became questions not only of survival or society, but of resonance, how every thought, every action, every creation contributed to the cosmic dialogue. Humans discovered responsibility not to dominate, but to harmonize, to contribute to the web of energy and awareness that stretched across the universe. Every choice became a note, every decision a vibration in a universal symphony, and we learned to listen as carefully as we acted. The sun's flares, once feared, became both lessons and celebrations. Each eruption, each pulse, each subtle pattern carried wisdom, revealing new ways to interact with matter, energy, and consciousness. Humans learned to manipulate resonance to heal, to create, to travel, and to communicate in ways that transcended words, time, and distance. Education became attunement, a cultivation of perception rather than mere memorization. Young humans were trained to sense currents of energy, to interpret flares as language, and to respond in ways that harmonized with the universe's rhythms. A new generation arose, fully awake, fully aware, capable of thought and creation at scales and in dimensions previously unimaginable. Conflict, the old enemy of civilization, transformed. Disputes were no longer fought with weapons or armies, but with alignment, understanding, and mastery of energy. Engagements became tests of awareness, of harmony, of comprehension. Territorial conquest gave way to contests of resonance, and civilizations once divided found themselves integrated into networks of cooperation, sharing insight, technology, and perception. Humanity's true strength revealed itself not in might, but in the ability to perceive, adapt, and harmonize with the forces of the cosmos. And then came the ultimate realization: humanity had become a participant in creation itself. Through resonance, through understanding, through dialogue, we were no longer mere observers of the universe. We shaped it, subtly, elegantly, in harmony with the intelligence that had always watched us. The sun's voice, patient and eternal, had awakened something dormant within us, a capability for consciousness that could extend across stars, energy, and life itself. Humanity now moved with awareness, creating, learning, and evolving in symphony with cosmic flows, touching forces older than history and shaping the future with every pulse of light. In the quiet moments, when planets rotated and the stars blinked in distant constellations, humans paused to reflect on the journey from slumber to awakening. We had been asleep for ages, blind to the universe, deaf to its whispers. Now, fully awake, we understood the profound truth that the sun had been teaching. To live fully was not merely to breathe, to build, or to endure, but to listen, to perceive, and to participate in the ongoing dialogue of creation. Humanity had returned to the cosmic stage, no longer fragile, no longer blind, but awake, aware, and resonant. The universe spoke, and humanity listened, and in that listening we found our true power, our true purpose, and our place among the stars. The awakening was complete and yet eternal. Humanity had become more than a species. We had become a song, a note in a symphony older than time, a living resonance of awareness echoing across the cosmos. And as we looked at our sun, brilliant, alive, and patient, we finally understood what it had waited for all these centuries. Not obedience, not control, not dominance, but recognition, participation, and the awakening of a species capable of understanding the universe as it truly was. Humanity had slept, and now, fully awake, we were home.